Tingi tu hei tia, tēnei te mihi ki a koe. Ka Waikato-Tainui nui tonu. Nō mai haere mai tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. I would like to acknowledge Lady Raiha Mahuta. Arahanui ki a koe, nanaia. As the first Pākehā to rise to speak in this third reading, my speech may seem a little pedestrian, but make no mistake, while I cannot imitate the humour of my mātua Parekura Horomia, I have the heart to support this very important piece of legislation. Make no mistake that it is as important to Pākehā as it is to Te Whānui Tainui. I want to recognise another o mātua koro weteri, tēnei te mihi ki a koe koro. And I want to acknowledge also Tukurairangi Morgan and his presence in the chamber this afternoon. I have another special mātua for me who is also in this chamber, and that is Dr. Michael Cullen. And it's a great delight to look again across these benches and see his wise face here this afternoon. I want to pay a tribute to all of those who have worked and waited for this. The initial settlement with Waikato-Tainui was signed by Michael Cullen on behalf of the Crown in August 2008. And what we have in this piece of legislation is something unique to Aotearoa New Zealand, and something that I hope can be taken further as new arrangements, new settlements, new ways of doing things are forged not only in this generation but the next. I want to quote from the legislation because I am so struck by the way it is framed up. I have a very strong sense as a Pākehā of Aotearoa New Zealand identity in this piece of legislation. And I want to read something that I identify with as a Pākehā Member of Parliament. And it is from Part 2 of the legislation. It simply says this: the Waikato River is our tupuna, which has mana and in turn represents the mana and mauri of Waikato-Tainui. The Waikato River is a single, indivisible being that flows from Te Taheke Hukahuka to Te Puaha o Waikato and includes its waters, banks and beds and all minerals under them. And its streams, waterways, tributaries, lakes, aquatic fisheries, vegetation, floodplains, wetlands, islands, springs, water column, airspace and substratum, as well as its metaphysical being. Our relationship with the Waikato River and our respect for it gives rise to our responsibilities to protect te mana o te awa and to exercise our mana whakahaere in accordance with our long-established tikanga to ensure the well-being of the river. Our relationship with the river and our respect for it lies at the heart of our spiritual and physical well-being and our tribal identity and culture. Unquote. That is something that means a great deal to Tainui. It is something that means a great deal to me as a New Zealander, because here is something very significant, printed in black and white in the law of our land. And we have come to that point where we are able to recognise such things, express them in their original language, and credit them with legal status. And it is new. This isn't simply an interpretation of Te Tiriti o Waitangi. This is about a new model of co-management of a waterway that is of enormous importance. And that leads me to the second bit that I wish to quote from the legislation. And it is under Clause 9, and it talks about the scope of vision and strategy, Te Turi Whai Mana. It says the Waikato River and its contribution to New Zealand's cultural, social, environmental and economic well-being is of national importance. It is of importance to me as a Pākehā for all those reasons, as much as it is to Māori and to Waikato-Tainui for all of the antecedent reasons that they hold dear. And this makes me very proud. Sometimes there are laws that are passed in this Parliament that are not laws of which I'm proud. But this is one that has far and away the majority support of members of Parliament. And while we have had some not very likeable or respectful speeches in the course of the passage of this legislation, we are at the part now where the vast majority of this House recognises the importance of the Waikato Awa and its importance across almost everything that is important to human beings: cultural, spiritual, physical, economic. And so this co-management model that we have inside this legislation is unique, is something by its very language can only be found in this country, cannot be found anywhere else in the world because of the language, because of te reo, because of the antecedent, the things that went before, the antecedent history and connection with the awa. And so this deed of settlement inside this legislation will allow for an unprecedented era of co-management of the river. And that co-management will take into account, because it is charged to do so by this legislation, the cultural, the spiritual, the physical, the economic well-being of Aotearoa New Zealand. This is a piece of legislation which is for all New Zealanders. There is no doubt that this wonderful river feeds some of the richest pasture and land in our country. And even if one were only to take an economic perspective, that would be reason enough to support this legislation. But there are many more reasons besides. So with all of my respect to the members of the Māori Affairs Select Committee, which has shepherded this through, to those who have, as I said earlier, worked and waited for this, to those who have passed on in the course of working and waiting, I pay a tribute and I acknowledge what you have done. To those particularly here in the House whose fingerprints are all over this, I wish to pay my respects. And as a Pākehā Member of Parliament, I am proud and delighted to lend my support and the support, join with my colleagues and my mātua here in the Labour Party, to support this third reading of this most significant legislation. Tēnā koutou, kia ora koutou katoa.